Thank you for coming. My name is John Bigger, and I've got my friend here, Shane Little. With our surnames, we thought we'd always become a double act. So, we both were doing PhDs at Loughborough University on anarchism, and we both live in Loughborough. So one day I just got in touch with Shane and I said, look, with our surnames and the fact that we both do anarchism, surely we should have a podcast. So a couple of years ago we started a podcast. So we're used to chatting about anarchism together, and that's what we're going to do. It's going to begin by having a little conversation, and then we'll open it up. So what I thought we'd do, what we thought we'd do, Shane agreed with this, I think, is that we'd start by talking about some of the definitions that we kind of use, because one of them actually is politics itself. And when we hear the word politics, we probably have all sorts of definitions and things come to mind. I don't know if you want to come in there.
Yeah, I think for me, I like to frame anarchism as a type of politics. I think kind of popular conception of anarchism is that it's a kind of political theory, if you will, that promotes chaos and kind of like individual self-gain and a kind of all against all, the kind of cartoonish kind of conception of anarchism which is prevalent in popular society. So I kind of dispel that, although I think in this audience you probably kind of have an idea that that's not what anarchism is anyway. But anarchism is often kind of presented as an anti-politics or as a kind of protest politics. So, you kind of have an image of the kind of insurrectionary anarchist, in the kind of black bloc and everything. And, anarchisms, they're always against everything. And then the kind of what they're for sometimes gets kind of lost in the noise. So kind of looking to combat that, but then also like, anarchism is kind of understood as an anti-politics in the sense that, just black's good, thanks, that people's conceptions of politics is so dominated by, at least here, parliamentary politics. So politics is a kind of act of power. It's about capturing power, usually through the nation state, and then kind of through that instrument, normally through violence, you kind of impose your political vision. And anarchism is seen to be antithetical to that, and i.e. an anti-politics. So I guess here we kind of wanted to present anarchism as a politics and a different way of doing politics outside of the nation state.
Well, I think it's also worthwhile talking about how chaotic normal politics is, if you will. How chaotic capitalism is, and how, obviously it's destroying the planet, and the greed that it encourages is backed up by our national political structures. So we have a system that is chaotic, and yet anarchism is often presented as that as well, which is ironic. And I think we want to kind of present a more positive view of anarchism, like Shane says, as politics rather than not politics, because politics isn't just what goes on at Westminster or what we see in the news. It's our everyday lives. It's our relationships with one another. It's the way we organise our groups. We should see politics in everything that we do because it affects all of us. I think that's where we're coming from, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So kind of, I think broadly, the kind of principles of anarchism is a form of, well, I think first we should kind of define what we mean by politics, which I very kind of like basic level is politics is how we as individuals and as collectives organize our daily lives, and get through the day and organize ourselves, our families, and our communities.
That's a very old definition of politics, isn't it? That's like going right back to the roots of it, isn't it?
Well, I'd say that is politics, but now our understanding of politics has become very rudimentary, where we kind of delegate these decisions to representatives in, normally within the kind of apparatus of a state. Whereas anarchism suggests that no, we should be making those decisions ourselves collectively and not mediating them to representatives. So, I guess the kind of core principles of anarchism would be like we come together through voluntary cooperation and we organize decentrally. Everybody who has who may be affected by a particular decision will have a say within that decision and the decision-making process. There's a participatory decision-making process, and also the concept of mutual aid, where we come together collectively to not just make decisions and act in ways for individual gain, but in ways that kind of benefit yourself, the individual, and the others around you.
It might be that you're already in groups that do that they are horizontal and they are non-hierarchical, and that is a major difference between an anarchist politics and what I keep calling normal politics. Some of the problems some of the causes of the chaos that we have are those very hierarchical structures where people can't be held to account properly. And obviously, I mentioned capitalism earlier. I think that economic system that we are effectively governed by means that people get away with crimes against people, crimes against the planet, because those politicians are there to kind of keep that system going because they benefit from it. So hierarchy is a problem, and so are the oppressive relationships that are created by it. Anarchism tries to come at the problem by saying let's dismantle those hierarchies. Let's have a more horizontal way of doing things. Let's have a more direct democratic solution, and necessarily that means we can do that in small groups. It's perhaps easier in small groups than it is to think, well, how could we do this on a national scale? Some people like to see anarchism also as some kind of end result, some kind of utopia after a revolution and all the rest of it. And that's perhaps a little bit unrealistic, I would say. And I think anarchism actually is something that we can do every day whenever we come across structures that are hierarchical. We can ask the leaders, why have you got that power? What are you using that power for? Why is it inherently you that gets to decide? And we can try to dismantle those structures and make sure that everybody is getting a say and getting the answers that they need from the organisations that they're in.
Yeah, I think kind of just developing that a little bit. I'd say anarchism is different in most other kind of political theories and ideologies, especially in the West, in that at least I think it's at its best when it's not programmatic, in the sense that, this is what anarchism is. This is the vision that we should be striving for, i.e. kind of a political blueprint, if you will, right? There's certainly anarchisms that do that, but I don't think they're necessarily the best ones. I see anarchism as a kind of set of principles, really, kind of that kind of guides you to make decisions collectively in a kind of non-hierarchical way, and making decisions not based on a particular kind of vision of what we ought to be doing, but what's best for you and your local community or your family, right? So anarchism can look very different in different places. So I think that's kind of the important thing, not to think of it as a kind of rigid, static ideology or program that we're striving towards. When the revolution comes, we're all going to get our Kropotkin books out and this is what Kropotkin said, so this is what we're going to do. But rather it's an act of coming together collectively and be okay, well, what's the best solutions to the problems in our community? And then that's what anarchism is, and that's kind of anarchist politics that we're trying to get across today. And that's why anarchist politics, especially in the West, is kind of unique, in the sense that all other politics is these decisions are delegated to representatives and to officials, whereas anarchism demands that we make those decisions ourselves and we take control of our kind of daily affairs.
I think we should be honest about this. This is quite ironic in a way, and it's also potentially contradictory. We are not like a political party trying to encourage everybody to become anarchists. We're not saying that we should have groups that then go in an anarchist direction. What we're saying is that we should try to make our groups more democratic, and as a result of that, the more people that do that, the more anarchist society becomes, and the more people are involved in a direct democratic say in their communities. If they don't agree with every anarchist doctrine or whatever, that's irrelevant.
Yeah, and I say like not just in our groups, but also in our daily lives and our interactions with one another, right? So it's and I think we kind of act as anarchists every day, but just not really realize it. Hey, in the sense that when we kind of get together with our friends, and we kind of decide, that, making a plan for an activity or something, and we kind of come to a consensus and of what we're going to do in a direction. That's anarchist politics in practice, right?
Yeah,
when we do that with our families as well, that's within our clans, that's an anarchist politics. And then it's just about that, taking that kind of practice, that mindset, and expanding it outwards. And, for some reason, we make these decisions collectively, like, with our friends, with our families, and sometimes in some small communities. But then when it gets to a certain size, normally like town size or city size, then suddenly people's political imagination just evaporates. And then suddenly we need representatives to do these, to make these decisions for us. And
is it people's political imaginations, or is it the fact that we're told the state will provide? I think back to the early stages of the COVID pandemic and how people were really scared, people were really worried. There wasn't yet a lockdown, and suddenly all these mutual aid groups started springing up around the country, actually organised initially by anarchists, to try to say we can provide shopping for people, we can provide medical supplies to people without the state intervening. And when the state saw that was working well, suddenly they started organising things themselves, or we saw local politicians come in and co-opt whatever was happening at a local level, so that the local councillors were involved or whatever, and suddenly it became a different thing. But initially the state wasn't there, because the state is actually slow to act at times.
Yeah, I would say they're not mutually So for me, it's I would say it's like that's a good example. So we normally kind of act as anarchists and anarchistically, but then when we get to a certain scale, like a government official will come in or something and kind of co-opt that momentum, and then it kind of seems like natural that then once it gets to a certain size, it then gets delegated onto that. Whereas I think anarchism demands that no, you actually keep ownership of these initiatives, and not kind of let leaders come in, whether they're kind of the nation state or other
disagreeing. Are we slightly disagreeing?
I think so.
Okay. So I just want to build on that. So I think you're right that the politicians come in at a certain stage, but I also think the general public don't really. They kind of expect the state to come in as well.
Yeah.
Because that is what they pay their taxes for, and that is the system that they've grown up in, to the point that it is normalised. It is absolutely not. It's really hard to imagine the world with the country without the state. It's really hard to imagine how would you run things, how would you do things. Obvious questions. I don't have the answer to them, and I'm not sure that I should have the answer to them, because, like Shane said earlier, organising things in groups should be about what the group decides to do. So there isn't one anarchism that would suddenly take over things. Yeah. But the fact that there is one state that exists in this country and does control things, people do expect it to do things. So I think there is a challenge there when we're in groups to explain to people that you can do things in a different way. You don't have to get your local councillor involved with everything necessarily. It might be useful on occasions, and I wouldn't say don't do it. As a group, you have to decide how to do things, but there might be a little bit of education for people if they're uncomfortable with organising things themselves. Because we're taught not to.
Yeah, and you make my point. That's what I mean by political imagination.
We're not disagreeing.
No, we're not.
Okay.
That's right. That's my point. Like we kind of in our everyday lives, we act as anarchists, in that we kind of make decisions through consensus, collectively, and normally for like mutual enjoyment, if you will, mutual benefit. But then when it gets to a certain size, either gets co-opted or then gets moved on to a state representative. Whereas anarchism wants you to recognize that those behaviors that you're doing in an everyday is a form of politics. It's an anarchist politics, it's a form of direct democracy and of participation, full participatory politics, right? And then it demands that when it gets to a certain size, whether it gets difficult, it probably will get difficult, and it'll be challenging because people will come to live to co-opt that. It demands that no, you keep the autonomy of that group going. and keep expanding it outwards. And I think that's what I'm trying to get across with anarchist politics. We do it every day, but then when it gets to a certain point, suddenly our political brains tick in and we think nation state, councils and stuff like this. And anarchism's like, no, don't go to that next state to representative and to hierarchical politics. Keep that decentralized horizontal politics and keep expanding outwards. And to me, that's what I'm trying to get as an anarchist
I
politics.
don't know whether I should say what I'm thinking.
You should totally say what you're thinking. This is anarchist spellbinding.
Did you vote a few weeks ago?
Yeah, I do.
So did I.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we both live in Loughborough, and it's a marginal
yeah.
constituency. It's had a Tory MP for ages, and there was a chance of getting rid of them. So I thought it's a no-brainer. But you know, it's but that's a tricky thing, isn't it? We're complex individuals, and I mean, I'm quite happy to be honest about my voting record. There's times I've spoilt my paper. There's times I've voted for more than one different party in my life. Always kind of very much on the left. Oh, well, I don't know. Can we say Labour's very much on the left? No, probably not. But and I've actually also stood for Parliament as an anarchist candidate for the sheer hell of it. Which is what I wrote my PhD about. I wrote basically about myself entering an election in a liberal democracy as an anarchist candidate, and the fun that was, the horror that it was, and everything about it. But we're complex, aren't we? You're saying things get to a certain stage, and then the state takes over, and here we are. We have just recently had an election, and we took part in it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a tension, right? Like, I think with the anarchist politics or anarchism, there's a kind of knee-jerk reaction a lot of the time where just don't engage with the state. You know, it's like that saying like don't vote, it just encourages them or whatever. But I think you got to be kind of realistic, and that the state is here to stay for the foreseeable future. You know, we kind of have representatives in there that are a little bit better, and that might be worth considering and voting for those people, as it does, you know, kind of impact people's lives. But where we can, we should be developing this other politics. Be self-aware that this is another form of politics. This isn't just kind of, you know, behavior that you do with your friends. It is a politics, and try and preserve that and expand it outwards as much as we can until it gets to a point where you can challenge kind of, you know, senses of authority and can kind of develop other communities and social behaviors.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a tension there, like, you know, kind of the world that we live in and the world that we'd like to see. And you just got to be realistic and pragmatic about that. And I think that's a way of like thinking about anarchist politics as well. And it gives you that flexibility because you're kind of working towards building these non-hierarchical relationships.
Yeah, and just on voting as well, it's worth pointing out that the early anarchist writers who encouraged people not to embrace the idea of liberal democracy were writing before liberal democracy became properly established. So they were against the idea because they believed it would just mean that you are electing people who will manage capitalism rather than electing people who will get rid of it. Well, okay. So I don't mind if anarchists come to the conclusion that they don't want to vote and they want to disengage with official politics completely. That's fine by me, and I respect that. And I've like I say, I've not voted in the past because I've taken that opinion. But what I would say is that there are many different approaches to the state that anarchists have. And, you know, I think it's for each individual to decide how they're going to kind of organise their affairs in relation to the state. But in this present election, I just decided it was worth trying to get rid of the Tory that was there in my constituency.
I've got more Tories.
Sorry?
I'm the new Tory party was elected. There is no parliamentary road to anarchism.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely, there isn't. Yeah.
We can have contributions from the...
Yeah, let's open up now, right?
Let's open it up. Let's see what people have to say.
Yeah, so we've got a mic. Wait for the mic. David, just here. Look at that.
Hi, I love the idea of problem solving by anarchy. How does that work for the hidden problems like, I don't know, air pollution or the climate crisis? am I thinking too paternalistically, or should there be an element of this is an abstract, very scary but distant problem? How does Anarchy respond to that?
Well, I think if you are working in groups that are combating that sort of thing, it's about trying to make sure that your group works in such a way that it is properly democratic and everyone's got a say. Really big, complex issues, aren't there, that we're facing, and we're not saying that organising in this way necessarily solves those problems, but if more people do it, then more people are involved, and then hopefully it does kind of scale upwards into that sort of scenario, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I think I've been reading about this actually, and when you get to the root of people's anxiety with climate, it tends to be their lack of agency, their lack of thinking they can actually do anything, right? Because it just seems so massive, and a part of that is because we kind of we expect an organization or big organizations to come and solve these problems for us. So we constantly got to appeal to authority to do things that we think's best, right? Whereas I think anarchism will kind of break that down in the sense of, it doesn't reduce it like kind of the liberal conceptions of the individual and lifestyle, but it's definitely, that's the starting point, like change your behaviors, change the behaviors of people around you, come together, try and like find solutions. And then again, like this idea of just not, you said higher up, or you said up, I'm going to go against you. And I say, no, don't scale things up, scale things outwards, right? And then through that, then we can kind of start creating like organizations and structures that can like really make change. So yeah, I think of it, kind of break it down, and then it becomes less overwhelming, and then also it becomes less about kind of protest politics as well, which is basically just appealing to authority, to act in ways, to act in your interests, right? And I don't think that's the kind of politics that we should be striving towards, and even lifestyles, right? It's that servitude. We should be taking control of our lives. So I think that's kind of like what an anarchist perspective would look like.
A lot of the actions that you've talked about are based off of rights that I think a lot of people in the West take for granted, the right to assembly, the right to even kind of hold opinions that are against the state. What does anarchist politics look like in states where those rights are severely curtailed or even removed entirely?
I can tell you. So, again, I've been reading about rights as well. Good question. I think, again, it depends I think an anarchist conception of rights is different to a liberal conception of rights. Where a liberal conception of rights, again, is kind of appealing to an authority to bestow you particular rights, right? You have the right to the X, Y, Z, and we will...
If you can't even exercise those rights without the state coming in and breaking up your group, how does it work?
Yeah, so I would say the anarchist doesn't work on that logic. For anarchism, it's not about the bestowment of rights, it's about the assertion of rights. It's like saying, we have these rights, so we're going to act like we have these rights rather than look for some kind of state or organization to protect those rights for us. So, a big part of anarchism is self-responsibility. You kind of think about freedom, really, it's just nothing else than responsibility, right? Freedom is kind of living lives that we want, so we have to be responsible to take that ourselves and make the decisions ourselves. It challenges us to think about rights as differently, not as something that's bestowed upon us, this kind of conceptual framework that's codified, but rather it's shared kind of practices that we mutually agree on, that we act in a certain way. So I think the idea is kind of think of it as asserting rights rather than hoping rights will be given to you.
But this can be hard even in the UK. Like, being an anarchist in the UK often means people having pseudonyms and keeping quiet on social media and stuff like that. We can't really do that because we did PhDs in it. I stood in an election. What a silly thing to do. We're known to the state basically, and so that must be. I can't imagine what that's like in other places around the world. That must be hell. But what we're talking about is the way people organise in general. We're not necessarily talking about anarchists as such. We're talking how everybody can organise in a non-hierarchical way and in a democratic way. And so I suppose the encouragement is that people should try doing that wherever they are. But power structures are, really forceful.
And also, just quickly add, I think, even in liberal societies, you have to act like you have those rights anyway, like the right to protest. You constantly got to enact that right to preserve it, right? So you got to get out. I guess what we're trying to constantly get at here is move people away from relying on organizations and others and representatives for your own interests, but you have to assert those interests yourself and build those.
And sometimes in liberal democracy, sometimes the people that you agree with the most on things might actually be the ones that criticize you the most. So, for example, I think anarchism and liberalism has some real key features that go together: a belief in freedom, at its core, and an idea around rights, although there's differences in that. But liberal democracy is based on the idea of representation. So the moment you try to do things that don't involve representatives, liberals, who are the people that kind of are dominant in our official politics, they will come to try and shut that down. They don't, because that's a threat, a direct threat to the system that they benefit from. Sorry for any liberals here.
Hi. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So you mentioned anarchy starting out with families and small groups of people making decisions for themselves. And I'm thinking about Rupert Murdoch and his family and friends. I'm sure they make decisions for themselves without regard to nation states and what the law might say. So my question is, why should we imagine that a small group of people making decisions for themselves are going to have the interests of the wider community at heart?
Yeah.
Well, I agree. There will be people who take advantage, won't there? And I don't think that they were working in such a way that it was non-hierarchical, though. I think they were people that wanted to climb the hierarchy of society and capitalism. And so one thing we've not discussed, actually, which I think is integral to this, is that for an anarchist politics, the ends and the means need to be tied together. So the means must justify the ends. Anarchists believe that however you organise your groups, or however you want society to be in the future, it will reflect the way you've done it. So if you have a patriarchal structure and you want to change the world, if you get to change the world, you'll still have a patriarchal society, that sort of thing. If you want to change the world in some sort of way that involves having, I don't know, some kind of intelligent group of people at the top of your organisation that you've elected to be there, who are going to run your revolution, and you get your revolution, they're going to stay in power. They're going to take over from the state, and they will stay there. It's that sort of idea. So the ends and means should be tied together, and if you have a structure that is truly non-hierarchical, and your aim is to create some kind of non-hierarchical future, that is what you should hopefully reach if you're also linking with other groups that are trying to do the same.
So in society, the way it's organised now, kind of around neoliberal societies, it's very kind of individualistic, and self-interest, and, kind of personal gain, at the expense of others. Whereas I think through the majority of human existence, that's perhaps not been the case. And also, I think that there is a conversation on ethics when it comes to anarchist politics, and part of that is understanding that there's a mutual interdependency between us as individuals, and we strive individually most when we're striving collectively, and there's people around us that can contribute to our lives and enrich our lives, that enriches us. It might not be materially, but like immaterially, and I think that's kind of a higher source of happiness. So I think that there is a kind of ethical like element there, whereas in anarchist politics we would have to kind of promote that kind of thinking, that understanding. I think the climate is a really strong instrument in that way. Like, the climate highlights the interdependency between us as humans, but not just us as humans, but humans in the non-human world, right? And we need to change our relationships to be more beneficial. And the kind of catchphrase in anarchism is mutual aid, and that's kind of what Kropotkin was getting at in his book of Mutual Aid. It's that, as a species, we strive and we progress, if you will, best when we actually working together collectively and not fighting amongst one another. So yeah, I think it'll be kind of a change in ethics, and then also within that change of ethics, that will kind of nurture more, I think, kind of participatory behaviors and behaviors where kind of mutual benefit is outweighed, more beneficial, I'm saying benefit too much, than selfish ones. Does that make sense? Hopefully that kind of answers your question a little bit. I think you can only safeguard against that. That's the point I'm trying to make. You are going to have people who will be kind of self-interested in that. But if you have people like that, then why on earth would you ever organize society with the nation state and capitalism, where you have these huge instruments of power and violence, which can be held by these individuals? That's the kind of very definition of insanity, right? That if we have propensity in humans to do these nasty, self-interested things, why would we create organizations that can, lead that down to really perilous ways?
But I think you want to come back at us, right?
Well, I'd say the reason for that is because it benefits those people who just want to grab all the power. So the hierarchies were created by the people who sought to put one over on everyone else, and those structures are created by and sustained by the rich and powerful because it's in their interest. So you could say they're the anarchists. They're doing what the hell they like and creating this sham of democracy and this charade of the nation is looking after people, and really it's just supporting their position in their extreme power.
They might see themselves as anarchists. They are not. So their ends and means do not tie together. They cannot justify the power and the wealth that they've got when we've got such problems with the planet and so much inequality and so much poverty. So they're as far removed from anarchism as they could be. Anarchism shouldn't be seen as individuals just doing what the hell they like. Freedom, true freedom, comes collectively. It comes from everybody being free. And if there is one person who isn't free, then there's a problem. And that means that it's a problem that we need to solve. And the way we're saying is to solve it, to get somewhere towards solving it, is to organise our own affairs in the correct way, in the best way possible, and make links with other people that are doing so. Does that help?
Hello. I think. Sorry, is that better? I think my question is a bit more on the other end of the spectrum from that. I'm asking for a bit more granularity about how do you do it in principle, in practice, on the ground floor. So I've been involved with 4 community projects at a really basic level. I'm very good at driving through a progress, an agenda. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do all these things. I need this person to do this person to do that. That's all fine. But the one time I tried to organise along these principles, which was a community farm, 100 people came to the first meeting and we all sat around and I said, okay, so how do you want to do this? Silence. People didn't know. I just want to understand the distinction between driving something. I know it's a huge distinction, but I don't know how to go on it, between driving something through and asking how do you want to do it.
Yeah, that is tough, isn't it? I've been involved with organisations where we have organised in an anarchist way, and this is, I think, slightly problematic, but it worked. In that the person who organised it set out the parameters in an anarchistic way right at the start and said, this is how we'd like to organise. Discussed it, didn't say this is the way we're going to organise, but set out how we would do it. So there was no leader as such, although the person who organised it had most of the information and knew exactly where they wanted to go. So there is a problem there, but they could have been challenged at any time. And making sure that when you have meetings, you have a rough idea about what your, an agenda, but you open it up and allow people to contribute, and you give everybody a say, and that is the real basics of it. But it sounds like the problem, from what you've said, is obviously, you've only given us a tiny amount of information, but it sounds like, I think people, and again, it might come back to the fact that people are a little bit spoon-fed with politics in general. If you start with a really open question, people probably won't have thought about that until you've said it, and then it's quite tricky to keep things on track. So what I would recommend is some kind of proposal to people right from the off and say, this is how I would like to organise things, this is how I'd like us to come together We sit down, we discuss things, we agree together our actions, our principles, our processes, and hopefully that gets things set up in the right direction. Does that kind of make sense?
It does make sense, and I wanted to sort of say also that thing about how you set it up actually then determines how it goes on doing, because I've seen that the projects I helped set up, which were much more hierarchical, still hierarchical.
Yeah.
And the one that I tried with the community farm failed, so I don't know about that one.
Yeah, there's really good resources online as well, which kind of you want to search for like consensus decision making processes and stuff, and you'll find like really good information packs which people can then maybe read beforehand or like give out at the time, or the first session could be just outlining like this is kind of decision making process and stuff. Because like what John said, we're so from just being a little kid all the way through school told what to do, and with a chain of authority and command, that when suddenly you're kind of given this freedom to like make your own decisions, you get that responsibility, anxiety comes in, right? And that's a behavior and that's a way of being that has to be learned. And I think like also like don't be too hard on yourself. It's really clumsy, like learning this new way of doing politics. So like there are going to be bumps along the way. I've been in groups where it's kind of there's been issues and what have you, but that's part of learning, right? And kind of embracing that, learning from that. That's kind of appreciative.
And also, people are so used to representative democracy, it's comforting.
Yeah.
Other people take responsibility. All you've got to do is vote once in a while. Other people will do things for you. If things go wrong, you can write them a letter, you can do a petition, you can stand with a placard. I'm not saying that any of those things are wrong, by the way, but it's not the same thing as getting stuck in and making decisions for yourself. It's a liberating thing to be able to do that. So yeah, I think it's experimental, really.
And also one more point, I think that it's, you are going to have some people that just don't want to get involved, and that's fine. But the point is that they have the opportunity to get involved if they want to. Just leaving that door open. It's yeah.
Oh, one more thing. No, I'm joking.
Hi, yeah. This festival's really inspiring, yeah? Hands up if you find this festival inspiring. Right, great, so I'm not alone. In 1971, I went to the first Glastonbury Fair. I was so inspired, I thought, today Glastonbury, tomorrow the world. That's when I became an anarchist, 1971, and I've been active ever since. What I discovered quite quickly is the world is run by, a very ruthless, establishment. Every country. It's not just the state. It's industry, the military, and so on. So when we talk about anarchism, it's not a program, but it's a goal. Yeah, it's a goal. The whole world should be anarchist. Yeah. And anything less is not acceptable. So it shouldn't be capitalist, shouldn't be based on power and money. It should be based upon people controlling their own lives in every country. So that's quite simple, yeah? It's not really, a complex thing. So the question is, how are we going to get there? And yes, it's important that we organise ourselves in the ways that you've talked. Everything you've said is very important, it's inspiring, but there's a huge gap. The question is, how do we change society? Not just organise ourselves and, look after each other and mutual aid. It's how do we get rid of capitalism and governments so that we have an anarchist society. So I'm a little bit frustrated because I think we can get too insular and forget the whole world out there if we're not careful. So to me, one of the questions that came up is, what do you do if you're, like you said about your group, wants to do all the right things, but, you're up against you're up against pollution, you're up against wars, you're up against poverty, you're up against power structures, everything. So what we need to do is build movements, huge movements in every country in the world. That's what the answer to what you said as well, about whether it's in Iran or, whether it's in China. I know it's tough, but we need to build movements in every country of the world internationally, so that people start to feel there is a real alternative. People power is a real alternative. And in the here and now, what groups can do is they can federate, they can network, they can link up, they can build movements. So, for example, the thing that I've been doing mainly over the last 20 years, believe it or not, is building up Friends of Parks groups. Anyone know how many Friends of Parks groups there are in this country? 7,000 independent local Friends of Parks groups, yeah? And they're federated through the National Federation. And that's a real movement of people who care about their local public green spaces, and they want to have a say, they want to be empowered, they want to support each other, they want to help maintain, they want to organise activities, they want to run the notice boards. This is a massive people power movement that virtually nobody even thinks about. So there's lots of other movements, the mutual aid movement you were talking about during COVID. Thousands of groups, tens of thousands of groups got set up spontaneously. So anarchism isn't like a theory, or a far off goal. It's a reality that everybody can participate in their everyday lives and in their local communities. So just a final few thoughts I just want to add is we need to get organised in every community, in every workplace, to build mutual aid, to build solidarity, to put out radical ideas, and to challenge the people who have got power. Not the people, but challenge the power structures. So one of the things I'm involved with is, I live in Haringey, is Haringey Solidarity Group. We've been going 30 years, and we support campaigns and struggles and protests and initiatives and mutual aid and solidarity throughout Haringey. Now, that could happen in wherever you all live. Get organised, get active, and speak out and support each other. Thank you very much. That's anarchism.
Do you guys want to come back on any of that?
Well, I think he answered his own question.
Yeah.
I do too.
How do you, where's that gap? How do we change the world? Well, I think it is that linking up of organisations and structures that are working in the way that we've described. I think that is what creates the movement that we're looking for, the kind of movements.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more than one movement as well.
Yeah, I think we're talking about the same thing as well, like people making those decisions themselves. That's what we're saying, I think if someone was to ask us what do we do, it's kind of completely missing the point of anarchism, as two representatives on stage, kind of, this is what you do, this is the yellow brick road that you need to go down. Like, that's not the point. The point of the anarchist politics is that people come together, have these conversations, and decide for themselves what to do. And part of that, how do we challenge powerful institutions? Part of that is, taking responsibility and prefiguring the world. You can't get people to make those decisions for you. You have to do them yourselves. And this is what anarchism's about. It's about responsibility, self-responsibility. So yeah, we're completely on the same page.
Just to say, if there's any youngsters under 25 who want to ask a question, you will jump the queue, because we never get questions from young people, and I really want to prioritise those. So we're going to go to this lady next.
Hiya. So I came with a really big question, which is what's the difference between anarchism and socialism? So I grew up in a socialist household, Marxism was around, but perhaps more interesting is about the similarities and things like workers' councils.
Yeah.
People know them as Soviets.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you knew or had comments on Assemble and the idea of the House of the People, which is a fairly new initiative. I worked on an electoral campaign. I coordinated an independent, and both myself and the candidate come from a community development, community participation background, and we're very much organising community gatherings ongoing to hear from everybody in the room. And she's gone, the lady who asked the question about how you do it. But my background is very much about facilitation. I work in community engagement. I work with tenants associations. So for years I've done lots of different facilitation skills, and I think that that's something that's really relevant with how you get to hear from everybody in the room, how you share that power, how you give everybody the opportunity to enjoy the pleasure of speaking your mind and of thinking together and in being heard. So sorry, that's a statement and a question, but I'm curious to know if you know about assemble and the House of the People, and what you think of that.
I've not heard of it, but it sounds good, doesn't it? just the name sounds good.
Shall I say a little bit? So essentially, it's another invention brainchild that's come out of Roger Hallam and his groupings. There's a launch on the 11th of August. The idea is that the House of the People replaces the House of Lords, and that local groups, such as our group or any group, who have participatory culture, ways of working, feed up into the House of the People. So it's similar to Workers' Council thing.
I mean, that sounds like a really interesting idea, and it's one I'm certainly going to look into to see how exactly it's proposed and how it would work and all the rest of it. So that sounds really good. I want to come to your big question there about socialism, because as far as I'm concerned, anarchism is socialism. The two, if we look at socialism and anarchism separately, they both developed around about the same time, and with the same people, in fact. So Mikhail Bakunin, a key thinker in anarchism and a key writer in the early years of anarchism, was a contemporary of Karl Marx, and they worked together in the first international that was getting together to kind of work out what socialism meant. Everything was going fine until they had a bit of an argument, a little bit of a tiff. And they had a tiff over Marx's idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat. So the Marxist idea is that you have a party that is led by the cleverest people, and they take over in the event of a revolution, and then eventually they work towards building communism and the state withers away. That's a very basic situation. Bakunin didn't like that. He thought that if you have a revolution and your party takes over, that party will just end up taking over and becoming a dictatorship. So anarchists like to think that Bakunin kind of predicted the Soviet Union, for example, but they fell out furiously over this and never spoke again. And Marx and his followers ended up taking control of the international movement of socialism. And so the two doctrines moved apart when originally they were the same thing, if that kind of makes sense. Is that all right?
Yeah, I think, one of the Haymarket Marlists are the best, all anarchists are socialists, but not all socialists are anarchists. So it's, anarchism is in the school of socialism, which is, about creating equitable communities and societies. Marxists, who the anarchists would call kind of authoritarian socialists, would like to enact that vision, that society through the instrument of the state, whereas anarchists won't. That's like the kind of simple answer, the distinction between the two. And then if you want to nerd out, there's some like other differences in kind of like historical materialism and then stuff like this. But
I mean,
that's for after.
I've often called myself a libertarian socialist,
Right,
because that is the kind of correct term. But libertarian has so many connotations nowadays, doesn't it? For particularly in America, you see these right-wing libertarians, and it's not remotely what I stand for. So
that's how it works. The right-wing can't invent anything, so they just steal ours.
Oh yeah. No, exactly. I mean, you look at the right; they can't do anything well, can they? They steal our ideas, our turns. They
run the world.
They do, but they don't do it in a very nice.
They're more militant, and they've got a class consciousness.
Yeah, true. Yeah, okay, yeah. They've got a solidarity amongst themselves, haven't they? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Sorry, I couldn't hear that. yeah, absolutely. Yep. Their art is awful, though, isn't it? Their music is terrible. I mean, their comedy. They don't do good comedy. They don't do anything that is kind of like wholesome. There's nothing in their artistic endeavours. Often you see the Conservatives in this country complaining about the BBC because someone said something on a drama that they don't like, and you just think, what drama do they want to watch? Do they want to watch dramas that are just like a bunch of white men saying stupid things? Sorry for our position here on the stage.
Hello. Given the fact that at the moment, as we sit at this nice green gathering, and we all love it, around the country, the fascists are attempting to attack mosques, and they're rioting. They're having massive demonstrations in Trafalgar Square, virtually unopposed, apart from a few old Trotskyites. When are we going to recover the anarchist spirit of anti-fascism and actually return to the streets and actually take part to stop this fascist upsurge and the attack on migrants and minority groups? When are we going to reclaim our history as radical anti-fascists and not as liberal therapy groups?
I wonder that myself. And I noticed a change in the anarchist movement itself back in 2017. And I don't know if people are going to like this or not, but I'm going to say it. When Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, the anarchist movement kind of disappeared a bit. A lot of people who thought they were anarchists suddenly saw someone who was going to make this country a bit better. And they flocked towards Momentum, the group within the Labour Party that was supporting Jeremy Corbyn. And that coincided with a lot of anarchist activity on the streets just disappearing. I don't know whether that's the cause, but that's what I think is the cause of where anarchism is now as a force on the streets. Hopefully people will start to realise that they can come back to anarchism now that Labour is not going to be delivering the sorts of things that they perhaps were hoping.
Direct action, not anarchism, because that's on the rise.
Yeah, well, you see, the thing is that there is a lot of groups that like that we've been talking about are on the rise. I agree, but here the question is about how anarchism is on the streets. Like, how big is the anarchist movement as a whole? What we're talking about really is the groups that work in an anarchist way, and I would say that is on the increase. I think there are more people getting involved with small groups and organising at a local level in their communities than ever before. I know lots of people who run street kitchens for people on the weekend who can't afford to feed themselves and stuff like that. It's going on in every single community. So yeah, I think the question there was specifically about anarchists and what they're doing rather than the sorts of groups we've been talking about. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that those groups are using anarchist principles.
Yes.
So they are anarchists.
Well, yeah. So yeah, I don't want to label people anarchists. They might not want to be, but yeah, I agree.
What's the difference between what this gentleman's wanting and the groups such as Just Stop Oil, and there's another one that's young people trying to be international. There's quite a lot of that.
Well,
I think. But I don't know what's the difference between what you're hoping for between these two groups.
I see anarchism as a social movement for the empowerment of the working class. We take over the planet, the interests of the people. It's a class group perspective. We believe in the peasantry.
We believe in the actual liberation of peasants and workers to take over the shitty planet and we advocate the end of capitalism, and we also advocate the end of capitalists. We need to return to the streets, which we once were strong in. We need to see the black and red flag flying again. You don't see it anywhere now. All you see, apart from the fascists, is a load of old Trotskyite school teachers going, "Yeah, boo to this Nazis," as the Nazis grow in strength. We need to return to a movement which is based on an ideal, the ideal that Durruti died for, the idea that we have a new world in our hearts, and that new world is growing every moment, to quote Bonaventura Durruti. And that movement's about organisation, yes, it's about heroic groups like the CNT, who created a new society in Spain, albeit for a very short time. And we need to reject liberal politics, therapy politics. While we're talking, as the mosques burn or migrants' hotels are attacked, we need to start to defend ourselves again. We need to bring back a militant anti-fascist movement.
That mimight be the perfect place.
To people saying that, and it's like, do the work, organise it, book the van, go there and do it. It's just such a fucking boring cliche to stand up and say, we need to do this.
Well, mate, I think really quite a lot of people in this festival are already doing it, so you might want to just take that message somewhere else. And I'm really sorry, we have to finish. It's a real shame things have got going. So I want to ask for two things, actually. We obviously need an anarchist session every year, and next year what I would like to do is co-create that.
Every day?
Every day. But unfortunately we don't get to live here, which is a real shame. So thank you for your participation. Let's try and do this again next year, and we'll try and co-create it. So I would invite you to come back next year. I don't know whether it will be at the same time.
Can I just say one thing as well? Is that
Yeah,
possible?
really quickly,
Quick?
yeah.
Our podcast is called Little Bigger Anarchism. Very easy to find, worth checking out, and there's more information about anarchism on that podcast.
Brilliant, thank you. So can we give them a round of applause?